So, usually when we talk about a democratic election, there's this unquestioned fundamental assumption that we all just accept.
Right, the idea that you go to the ballot box to pick the absolute best, brightest person available.
Exactly. Like you have a problem in your community, so you hire the smartest person in the room to fix it. It's just common
It
sense.
seems like common sense, yeah.
But what if I told you that in thousands of grassroots elections all around the world, voters are actively, deliberately doing the exact opposite?
Yeah, they are literally going to the polls and intentionally selecting the most mediocre candidate on the ballot.
It's wild. They look at the highly educated, deeply connected elites in their community and they lock them out of power on purpose.
Which is such a massive counterintuitive punch to the gut, right?
Yeah.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question about how democracy actually functions at the ground level.
Right, because when people intentionally vote against their own community's maximum potential, you can't just brush it off. You can't just say, oh, the voters are uninformed or they made a mistake.
No, not at all. There is a rigid mathematical logic driving that choice. It's entirely deliberate.
And that mathematical logic is what economists call the mediocrity trap. Welcome to this deep dive, by the way. Today, we are taking you into the ultra-micro battlefields of rural India to figure this out.
Yeah, we're looking at a groundbreaking, decade-long study from two top economists, Kaivan Munshi and Mark Rosenzweig.
The paper is called Networks, Commitment, and Competence, Caste in Indian Local Politics. And our mission today is to see how cutting-edge econometric data actually penetrates these mysterious informal power structures.
We want to see what happens when formal, Western-style democratic systems just totally collapse. Like what kind of ancient, informal immune system kicks in to keep these communities alive?
And the data we are going to explore is massive. We're talking about tracking thousands of street-level public goods.
To basically understand human incentive structures.
Right. We're going to look at how a random mathematical threshold, like a literal 50% line, can instantly turn a village into an economic powerhouse.
And we'll look at the shocking data behind a female political miracle, too. Plus, how policies designed to be fair actually ended up destroying a massive chunk of a town's wealth.
It is going to completely flip your understanding of politics and power upside down. So to understand how all this connects, we have to start at the root of the problem, right? The mediocrity trap itself.
Yeah, why on earth would a voter deliberately choose a worse candidate?
Right. It sounds crazy, but it comes down to something researchers call the two-dimensional conflict of quality.
Right, so when you evaluate a leader, you're actually measuring them on two totally separate axes. The first axis is vertical ability.
Okay, break that down for us. What exactly is vertical ability?
Vertical ability is basically pure, raw competence. If you elect this person, how good are they at actually doing the job?
Like, can they get things done?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In a local government context, vertical ability means navigating a really complex, often corrupt state bureaucracy.
Oh, man. Yeah, dealing with the red tape.
Right. It means having the managerial skills, the education, and honestly, the sharp elbows needed to fight the state government and drag money back to your town.
So a highly competent person, like a wealthy business owner or a farm manager, they have massive vertical ability.
Absolutely. They have the power to make the overall budget pie significantly larger.
Okay, so vertical ability is the size of the pie. But the second axis is horizontal preference. And this is where the conflict starts, right?
Yeah, because horizontal preference is all about what that leader actually wants to do with the pie once they get it.
The actual spending.
Exactly. Does the leader want to spend the town's budget on paving a road, or do they want to install streetlights? Do they want to build an irrigation canal or run fresh water pipes directly into houses?
And I imagine everyone in a community has a slightly different horizontal preference, depending on what they do for a living.
Oh, completely. It's based entirely on your socioeconomic status and your daily needs.
Let's ground this for a second. Let's use a relatable analogy for you listening. Imagine you're a homeowner and you've saved up some money to renovate your house.
Okay, I like this.
You need to hire a contractor, and you have two options. Option A is an absolute architectural genius, like a savant.
High vertical ability.
Off-the-charts vertical ability. If you hire him, he knows how to exploit zoning grants and tax loopholes to literally double your renovation budget from, say, $500,000 to $1 million.
Wow, so he brings a massive influx of resources.
A massive influx, but, and here's the catch, this genius has a massive ego. His horizontal preference is wildly different from yours. You want a new kitchen and a nursery for your new baby.
Right, normal house stuff.
Yeah, but he thinks kitchens are boring. And because there is no mechanism to force him to listen to you, he takes your $1 million budget and builds a giant, avant-garde, completely useless statue of a horse in your front yard.
Oh, wow. So it's a beautifully constructed disaster.
Exactly. A fully funded disaster for your family. You secured the absolute best talent and you suffered for it.
That's agonizing. So what's option B?
Option B is just an average Joe contractor. His vertical ability is low. He's not a genius. He can't get you any extra grant money, so your budget stays firmly at $500,000.
No extra pie.
No extra pie. But he is incredibly obedient. His horizontal preference aligns perfectly with yours. He takes that smaller budget and builds you exactly the kitchen and the nursery you asked for.
Right, so the rational choice isn't the genius.
No, the rational choice is the average Joe. You pick the mediocre guy.
And that homeowner's dilemma is the exact same calculus facing the median voter in these rural Indian villages.
It's exactly the same.
Munshi and Rosenzweig's data shows that when politicians get into office, if there is no commitment mechanism, like no structural way to force them to keep their promises, they inevitably spend public money on their own selfish preferences.
Which means the rich, highly competent elites in these villages are actually a massive liability to the average voter.
They're a huge risk. The business owners and large landowners have very different preferences than the average lower-income farmer.
Give me an example from the data.
Okay, so a rich landowner might want a massive, paved highway built straight to his commercial farm so he can transport cash crops.
Makes sense for him.
But he doesn't care about installing a public water tap in the center of the village because he already has a private diesel-powered well on his property.
Right. But the median voter, the average family, they desperately need that public water tap just to survive.
And they couldn't care less about the commercial highway.
So the rational move for the average voters isn't to just cross their fingers and hope the genius behaves.
No, the rational move is to preemptively lock the genius out of the candidate pool entirely. They use their sheer numbers at the ballot box to intentionally shut out the talent.
Wow. Which creates this fascinating but really depressing equilibrium. The voters deliberately elect a mediocre candidate who shares their exact preferences.
Yeah. They sacrifice the massive resources the elite could have brought in, just so they can feel safe that the smaller budget will at least be spent on the basic infrastructure they actually need.
And so the town remains permanently underdeveloped. That is the mediocrity trap.
It's an agonizing choice. You are basically choosing between poverty and betrayal.
And you choose poverty just so you don't get stabbed in the back. But if we look at this through the lens of a standard Western democracy, there's an obvious question here.
What's that?
Well, we have mechanisms to deal with rogue politicians, right? We have political parties that enforce discipline.
Right, the party whip.
Yeah. If a politician goes rogue and builds a horse statue instead of a kitchen, the party cuts their funding. Or, the voters simply throw them out of office in the next election.
The fear of losing the job is the leash.
Exactly. That leash keeps the politician obedient. So why doesn't that threat of re-election work in these villages?
To understand why those formal democratic safety nets are paralyzed, we really have to look at the unique setting of the data the researchers gathered.
Okay, paint the picture for us.
We are not looking at a federal Senate or a massive state governorship. The researchers used data from the 2006 Rural Economic and Development Survey, focusing on the lowest possible level of government.
How low are we talking?
We are talking about 13 major Indian states tracking 105 distinct constituencies over 3 entire election cycles.
Wow.
And they physically tracked the placement of 14,250 distinct street-level public good projects.
Wait, 14,000. So they are mapping exactly where a water pipe was laid or which specific street corner got a light bulb?
Yes, it is hyperlocal, high-density data. And the defining characteristic of this environment is the size of the voting district, which is called a ward.
Okay, how big is a ward?
The average ward in this study consists of only about 67 households.
67 households? That's not even a town. That's barely a neighborhood.
Yeah, if you have 67 houses, you're talking about a single, long dirt road.
So in a micro battlefield of just 67 families, I imagine the abstract concepts of modern democracy start to just disintegrate.
They really do. First of all, political parties are virtually non-existent at this level. The data shows that only 41% of these local candidates have any political party backing whatsoever.
So nearly 60% has zero party affiliation. There's no central party apparatus coming down from the Capitol to enforce a platform.
Exactly. No party discipline at all.
But what about the voters themselves? Even without a party, the 67 households could just vote the guy out in 4 years if he builds the wrong thing.
They could, except for a massive structural intervention by the Indian federal government.
Uh-oh. What did the government do?
In 1991, the government passed the 73rd Amendment to the Constitution. The goal was actually to break up historical monopolies on power and promote equality.
Which sounds good on paper.
Right. To do this, they implemented a system of mandatory random seat reservations. Every election cycle, the government randomly reserves certain ward seats for specific marginalized groups.
Like lower castes, indigenous tribes, or women.
Exactly. So the rules of who is legally allowed to run for office change randomly every single election.
Wait, if the seat reservation changes every term, then what does that do to the politicians currently in office?
It's devastating for political accountability. Because of this random rotation, a staggering 85% of these local leaders know for a fact that they will never be legally allowed to run for re-election in their ward.
85%. So they are mathematically guaranteed to be one and done.
Yes. They are barred from consecutive terms.
Oh my God. If I'm a politician and I know for an absolute fact that I cannot run again, I have absolutely zero fear of the voters' wrath.
Precisely. You don't care what they think.
Yeah.
Once elected, the leader basically becomes an unconstrained dictator of that local budget for their single term.
So formal democracy, the checks and balances, the fear of losing re-election, the pressure from political parties, it's all failed. The formal leash just does not exist.
It's completely severed.
Which is terrifying. Because if there is no legal way to force a politician to keep their promises, then every single village in this study should be permanently stuck in the mediocrity trap.
They should be. But the data shows they aren't. They somehow found a way to leash the elites.
And this is where the study gets truly profound. Because when the formal institutions of the state collapse, human beings fall back on older, deeper structures to survive.
Right, they fall back on the oldest network in human history. Bloodlines, and kinship. In the context of rural India, this manifests as the sub-caste, or the jati network.
Now, when a Western audience hears the word caste, they typically think of a rigid, ancient religious hierarchy.
Sure, and it certainly has those deep religious roots. But that is not how it is functioning in the econometrics of this specific study.
So how is the jati network operating on a practical economic level in these 67 household wards?
In this data, the jati network functions less as a religious caste and more as the ultimate inescapable mutual insurance policy.
Okay, break that down, like an insurance company.
Kind of. In these rural, agrarian microeconomies, there is no state-sponsored welfare. There is no unemployment insurance, no FEMA to bail you out if a monsoon destroys your farm.
And no state health care if someone gets a catastrophic illness.
None. If your crop fails and you have no savings, you are literally facing starvation. The state is not coming to save you.
Wow. So the only entity that will save you is your jati.
Yes. And within these subcastes, the data shows that the marriage rate, meaning people marrying strictly within their specific subcaste, is over 95%.
Over 95%. That is incredibly tight-knit.
Extremely. And these networks span across multiple neighboring villages. They pool their resources. If a member in good standing suffers a disaster, the jockey pays the medical bills.
They provide the grain to survive the winter. They ensure your children find viable spouses.
They're the only safety net standing between a family and total ruin.
So let's connect this mutual insurance network back to the political problem. We have a system where an elected leader has no fear of losing an election. But what if the voters elect a highly competent elite who belongs to their specific jati?
Okay, tracking with you.
If that elite gets into office, realizes he can't be reelected, and decides to betray his caste by embezzling the public money to build a highway for his own farm, what is the consequence?
The consequence is infinitely more severe than losing a local council seat. If a leader betrays the collective preference of his jati, he triggers a brutal cascade of social and economic sanctions.
The researchers actually map out a flowchart for this betrayal, right?
Will do. Step 1, you break your political promise to the group. Step 2, the elders and the community expel your family from the marriage circle.
Which, in a culture where 95% of marriages are arranged within the subcaste, is totally devastating. Your children are cut off from their social future.
It isolates the family completely. And then step 3 is the fatal blow. Because you were expelled from the marriage circle, you lose all access to the mutual insurance network.
Oh, wow. So the next time there is a drought, or your tractor breaks down, or your spouse gets sick, no one in the network is coming to help you.
No one. You are entirely on your own. It is absolute social and economic death.
That is a punishment so severe, so existential, that no amount of embezzled public funds or personal highways could possibly make up for it.
Exactly. And this is the massive breakthrough in the research. Because this informal punishment is so terrifying, it creates perfect, ironclad political commitment.
The voters finally have a leash, and it is a leash made of social survival.
A leash strong enough to control a genius.
So for the first time, the median voters within that subcaste can look at the highly competent, wealthy elite in their group, and they don't have to be terrified of him.
Right, because they know that even if his personal preference is to build a commercial highway, he would rather die than face excommunication.
So he will swallow his own desires, use his massive vertical ability to extract funding from the state, and spend it exactly how the median members of his caste tell him to.
The informal network solves the commitment problem that the formal democracy could not. The mediocrity trap is broken.
That is an unbelievable mechanism. It's like a mob-style enforcement, but used for public goods.
Yeah, essentially.
But wait, if the jati network is this powerful, does this just happen everywhere? Like, does every single village automatically elect brilliant elites because they have this caste discipline?
No, and this is where the statistical modeling reveals something truly mind-blowing. The superpower of caste discipline does not operate on a sliding scale.
What do you mean? It doesn't slowly fade in as a group gets larger?
Not at all. It only activates when a very specific mathematical trigger is tripped. The researchers discovered a massive threshold effect at exactly the 50% population mark.
Okay, let's break down that 50% red line. What happens if a subcaste makes up, say, 49% of the voting population? That's still a huge plurality.
If the subcaste is at 49%, the village remains completely stuck in the mediocrity trap.
Wait, really? Even at 49%, they are still too terrified to vote for the elite. Why?
Because at 49%, they do not possess a guaranteed mathematical absolute majority.
Ah.
In the game theory of these local elections, without an absolute majority, there's always a risk that the elite could form a coalition with another group, or leverage outside resources to insulate himself from the caste's punishment.
So the median voters just cannot risk the elite going rogue.
Exactly. But the literal second that the population share of a single subcaste ticks over to 51%, crossing that 0.5 threshold, the entire political ecology mutates instantly.
It's a binary switch. What does the data show actually happens the moment they hit 51%?
The voters realize they finally have the unassailable mathematical majority required to safely elect their elite and enforce social death.
And so they immediately stop voting for the mediocre candidate.
Yep. They unleash their elites, and the numbers just jump off the page. The instant the population crosses 50%, the probability of a professional manager or business owner taking office skyrockets by 30%.
30%? That is a sheer vertical cliff in the data.
It is. Furthermore, the land wealth of the elected official, which is basically the primary proxy for competence and bureaucratic leverage in these agrarian societies, suddenly spikes by 56%.
56% spike in wealth. So you literally go from having a subsistence farmer running the ward to having the wealthiest, most experienced agricultural baron taking the reins almost overnight.
The psychology of the electorate undergoes a complete 180-degree shift. Below 50%, the voters are terrified of the rich guy. Above 50%, the voters are actively demanding the rich guy take power.
Because they want his managerial experience. They want his ability to intimidate state bureaucrats.
They want his vertical ability. Because they know his hands are tied by the network. He is going to use his competence to drag resources down from the state, and he's going to hand those resources directly to them.
Okay, but if I am looking at this data from the outside, I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
We are looking at a correlation here. Wards with a subcaste, over 50%, have much wealthier, more managerial leaders. But correlation doesn't equal causation, right?
That's the classic critique, yeah.
The alternative theory seems really obvious. Couldn't it just be that wards where one single group makes up a huge majority are just naturally richer areas?
Or maybe they just happen to have a larger talent pool of educated people living there.
Exactly. We have to prove that this spike in competence is actually caused by the fear of social death and not just a demographic coincidence.
That is the exact critique that Munshi and Rosenzweig anticipated. They knew they had to rule out the rich area or better talent pool
Okay.
hypothesis.
So how did they do it?
The way they destroyed that alternative theory is a masterclass in econometric forensics. They found a mathematical anomaly in the data that perfectly isolates their mechanism. They call it the flat line of education.
Okay, walk us through the flat line. How does education prove the mechanism?
Well, we established that when the sub-caste population crosses the 50% threshold, the land wealth of the elected leader spikes by 56%.
Right.
And the probability of them being a manager jumps by 30%. Both of those metrics shoot straight up on the graph. The researchers then plotted a third metric, the average years of formal schooling of the elected leaders.
Okay, so if the alternative theory is correct, if crossing the 50% mark just means you are suddenly in a generally wealthier, smarter ward, then the education level of the leaders should spike right along with their wealth.
Exactly. Wealthier demographics generally correlate with higher formal education. They should all rise together.
But let me guess, they don't.
They don't. When the population crosses 50%, the graph for land wealth shoots up. The graph for management skills shoots up. But the graph for the leaders' years of education is perfectly flat.
Zero jump.
Zero jump. The line meanders across the 0.5 threshold as if absolutely nothing happened. The confidence intervals are completely horizontal.
Wait, why would wealth and management jump but education stay completely stagnant?
Because in rural India, education levels are not strongly linked to the overall size of a subcaste. The researchers prove that the average education of a group does not naturally increase just because the group gets larger.
Oh, wow. So this flat line of education is the smoking gun.
It is. It proves that the voters are not just generally electing better or more educated people because the area is richer.
They are surgically selecting for wealth and management experience, the exact two traits required to fight bureaucrats for public budgets, because the caste discipline rule has finally been activated.
Precisely. It isolates the voters' intent perfectly.
But we still need to look at the underlying population, don't we? Like, what if the talent pool itself changed? Did they look at the people who didn't get elected?
They did, and this puts the final nail in the coffin for the alternative hypothesis. The researchers went into the census data and looked at the potential candidate pool, the regular citizens living in the ward.
And what did they find?
They analyzed the 25th and 75th percentiles of the entire population to see if the general wealth and management skills of the community suddenly got better at the 50% mark.
Did the underlying talent pool change when the ward hit 51%?
Not a single bit. The non-parametric regression lines for the potential candidates are perfectly smooth across the 50% threshold. The underlying population's talent supply did not change.
That is just the implications of that are staggering to me.
Right.
It means the talent was always there. In every single village, whether the subcaste was at 40% or 60%, the wealthy, competent elites were always living there.
The society had the cure to the mediocrity trap sitting on the shelf the entire time.
But they actively, intentionally suppressed those elites and kept them out of power until the exact mathematical moment that the 50% discipline threshold was reached.
Only when they had the unassailable power to destroy the elite socially did they allow them to lead. It is a profound demonstration of rational self-preservation by the electorate.
Incredible. Okay, so the switch is flipped. The voters have the absolute majority. They activate the threat of social death, and they elect the competent elite.
Yep.
What is the actual real-world payoff for the citizens living in that ward? Like, if the goal was to get a bigger budget, does the elite actually deliver?
Oh, the governance dividend is massive. The researchers calculated the total volume of public goods delivered to the ward, meaning the actual physical infrastructure.
We're talking new paved roads, fresh water pipes, sanitation facilities, streetlights.
Exactly. And when the 50% discipline threshold is crossed and the elite takes over, the overall volume of public goods in the village absolutely explodes.
Give me the numbers.
The total infrastructure investment increases by 14% to 17% overall.
A 17% increase in physical infrastructure is a life-changing amount of development for a rural village.
It really is. And that bump happens purely because they changed the specific traits of the person they allowed to negotiate the budget.
The pie gets significantly bigger because the elite knows how to squeeze the system.
Right. But the size of the pie is only half the equation.
Horizontal preference. We have to go back to the spending. Did the elite actually keep his promise to the average voters, or did he use that 17% larger pie to sneakily build the projects he personally wanted?
This is the ultimate test of the mechanism, right?
Yeah, because earlier you said rich landowners want highways for their tractors, while average voters want public water taps. How did the researchers prove mathematically that the elite didn't just build his highway?
They prove it using a statistical tool I like to call the puppet proof.
The puppet proof.
Yeah.
Love that.
In the paper, it's presented as a cross-coefficient matrix. It operates kind of like a mathematical lie detector test.
How does it work?
The matrix takes the personal characteristics of the elected leader, like how much land they own, what their daily occupation is, and correlates it with what specific infrastructure actually gets built in the town during their term.
So it maps the leader's identity to the leader's actions.
Correct. And we know from the data that when there is no caste discipline, when the population is below 50%, leaders just spend the public money on whatever they personally desire.
And the coefficients prove this.
Yes. Normally, rich landowners massively prioritize building roads. The coefficient is a highly significant positive 0.9. They love roads.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, rich landowners actively sabotage spending on public electricity. The coefficient for electricity is a negative 6.33.
Wait, negative 6.33? That's a massive active aversion. Why do rich landowners hate public electricity so much?
Because a wealthy landowner already owns a private diesel generator. He doesn't want the public budget wasted on an electrical grid he doesn't need. He wants that money diverted to roads for his farm equipment.
People vote their own pocketbooks.
Exactly. Conversely, a leader who runs a local business manager strongly demands streetlights because he needs his customers to feel safe walking to his shop after dark.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. So what happens to those strong personal preferences when the ward crosses the 50% threshold and the caste network activates its threat?
When the 50% discipline is active, the data reveals the complete eradication of personal preference.
Eradication.
Yes. The researchers looked at the elite leader's personal traits and tried to predict what would be built. Above the 50% line, the statistical significance of the leader's own desires drops entirely to zero.
How do statistics represent dropping to zero?
Through the p-value.
Yeah.
In statistics, the p-value tells you if a relationship is real or just random noise. A very low p-value means the relationship is strong. Above the 50% line, the p-values for the leader's personal traits predicting the town's spending shoot up to 0.11, 0.06, and 0.27.
Meaning what?
In econometric terms, those numbers mean the predictive relationship has entirely evaporated. It's statistically meaningless.
Let me use an analogy to make sure I grasp the weight of this.
Go for it.
Normally, if I know a person absolutely loves pizza, I can strongly predict that if they go to a restaurant, they will order pizza. That is a strong coefficient.
Right.
But you're saying that above the 50% line, knowing the leader loves roads gives us zero predictive power about what they will actually build.
Yes.
It's like knowing they love pizza, but watching them walk into a restaurant and order a salad every single time because someone standing right behind them is holding a proverbial gun to their head and forcing them to order the salad.
That is exactly what the p-values are showing. Knowing the leader is a rich landowner who loves roads and hates electricity tells you absolutely nothing about the infrastructure that gets built.
Because he is no longer building what he wants.
Exactly. The data proves that these powerful, wealthy, highly educated elites have been reduced to total, absolute puppets of the caste.
That is wild.
They use their brilliance to bring home the millions, but they spend every single dime exactly as the median average voter in their caste demands.
The threat of social death is so absolute that their own ego, their own greed, and their own preferences are completely neutralized.
The informal leash works perfectly. It overrides human greed.
It's just brilliant. Now, while we have been talking mostly about wealthy landowners and business managers, there is an entirely different dimension to this study that is equally profound.
Yes, and it has to do with how this informal network interacts with gender dynamics.
The findings regarding female politicians in this data are some of the most striking, counterintuitive revelations in the entire paper. It reveals a phenomenon the data literally outlines as a female miracle.
Yeah, to appreciate this miracle, we first have to establish the baseline reality. In a deeply patriarchal society like rural India, what happens when a woman is elected to one of these local ward seats under normal circumstances?
Right.
Under normal circumstances, meaning in a ward where no single group has reached the 50% majority threshold and there's no caste discipline, the data shows that female representatives perform significantly worse. than male representatives.
How much worse?
Specifically, they secure about 5% to 6% less public goods infrastructure than a male leader in the same position. They bring in a smaller pie.
And we need to be extremely precise about why that deficit exists. This has absolutely nothing to do with inherent ability, intelligence, or work ethic.
Nothing at all. The 5% to 6% deficit is entirely a product of historical and structural oppression.
Right.
In these specific rural environments, women have been historically locked out of business management roles. They are rarely permitted to own large tracts of commercial land.
So because they have been systematically denied access to these spaces, they simply lack the traditional formal networks required to navigate a corrupt state bureaucracy.
Exactly. They don't have the pre-existing relationships with state officials to demand funding. They are being asked to play a rigged game without the necessary institutional tools.
So the baseline is a 5% to 6% deficit caused by structural lockouts. But what happens when we change the environment?
This is where it gets crazy.
What happens when a female leader is elected in a ward that has crossed the 50% red line, meaning she is now backed by the full weight of the caste network discipline?
The data flips violently. When you activate the caste discipline network, you are placing the full, inescapable weight of the entire community behind that leader.
And under the protection and enforcement of that network, female leaders do not just catch up to the men.
No, they completely blow past them.
What are the exact numbers when the network activates?
Under the 50% caste discipline, female leaders suddenly become 11% to 12% more competent than male leaders in securing public goods.
Wait. They go from a negative 5% deficit to a positive 11 to 12% advantage.
Yes.
That is a massive swing. How does an informal network generate that kind of outsized performance?
Because informal networks act as an unbelievable surrogate for formal institutional power.
Yeah.
Think about the physical reality of the job.
Okay.
When a female leader from a ward without network backing walks into a state government office to demand a grant, she might be ignored or dismissed by sexist bureaucrats. She has no leverage.
Yeah.
But when she walks into that same office, and the bureaucrat knows that she is backed by the unified, uncompromising force of an entire jati network, a network that represents an absolute majority of the voting base and will mobilize instantly if she is disrespected, she suddenly possesses infinite leverage.
Wow. The network provides the sharp elbows that society previously denied her.
Exactly. The jati network provides a scaffolding of raw political authority. It gives marginalized genders the overwhelming institutional backing they need to crush their political goals.
This challenges so many foundational assumptions.
It really does.
Because we in the West typically view traditional clan-based structures like caste or bloodlines as inherently oppressive. We see them as the very mechanisms holding marginalized people back.
Usually, yes.
Yet this data reveals a profound paradox. When modern formal institutions fail, or when they are actively hostile to marginalized groups, those same traditional structures can pivot and become the ultimate engine of empowerment. The painkiller becomes a superpower.
It is a remarkable adaptation. However, as with any system built on informal exclusionary networks, there is a dark side.
Yeah, we have to look at who is actually paying the price for this miracle.
Right. We've beaten the mediocrity trap, we've empowered marginalized genders, and we've generated a 17% increase in public goods.
But this is not a perfect utopian hack. Economists call this a second-best solution. What makes the system deeply flawed?
The core flaw of the caste network is that its political commitment is inherently selfish. The jati network only exists to provide mutual insurance for its own members.
The threat of social death only applies to the bloodline.
Therefore, the elite puppet is only programmed to serve the specific sub-caste that elected him.
So what happens to the people in the village who do not belong to that dominant 50% sub-caste?
If you belong to a minority group in that ward, if you are a tiny outer node on the social network map, perhaps a Muslim family in a Hindu-dominated ward, or a member of a lower caste in an upper caste-dominated area, you are ruthlessly and completely excluded from the public goods boom.
Oh, wow. So the 17% explosion in infrastructure simply does not reach you.
The data maps this physical exclusion perfectly. The elite puppet uses his vertical ability to bring the massive budget home, but his horizontal preference is strictly chained to his subcaste.
So he spends money entirely within the geographic borders of his own group's neighborhood.
Yes. The new paved roads, the freshwater pipes, the street lights, they magically stop right at the edge of the minority neighborhood. The informal network protects its own and leaves everyone else to fend for themselves.
It is a boom for the majority and total systemic deprivation for the minority.
Which brings us to the ultimate tragic irony of this entire system.
Yeah.
Because the Indian federal government was fully aware of this unfairness.
They knew that dominant castes were monopolizing resources and leaving minorities out in the cold.
And they tried to fix it.
They did. This brings us back to the 1991 constitutional amendment, the 73rd Amendment, which mandated the random rotating seat reservations.
Right. The government looked at these villages and said, it is fundamentally unjust that one dominant group gets to rule forever and hoard the infrastructure.
So they passed a law forcing the seats to rotate among different castes and genders every election, specifically to ensure fairness and equitable representation.
On paper, it is a beautifully progressive, well-intentioned policy.
It was designed to shatter monopolies. But what the data reveals about how this policy actually functioned in reality is a profound lesson in unintended consequences.
A really painful one.
Walk us through the math of the backfire.
Well, remember the fundamental mechanism keeping these villages out of the mediocrity trap. The only thing that forces the elites to serve the public is the threat of social death.
And the only thing that activates the threat of social death is a single subcaste maintaining that magic 50% threshold of the eligible voting population.
Right. You absolutely need 51% to safely unleash the elite. But look at what forced random seat rotation does to the demographics of an election.
What does it do?
By constantly changing which specific groups are legally permitted to run for office in a given cycle, the government is artificially and randomly resetting the demographic board.
Ah, I see where this is going.
If a ward is forced to only allow scheduled tribe candidates to run this cycle, the dominant subcaste might suddenly find that its pool of eligible voters and candidates has been fractured or disqualified from participating in the primary power dynamic.
So the government policy is actively diluting the voter base. It makes it mathematically much harder for any single group to hold on to that 50% majority.
Exactly. By attempting to artificially enforce fairness from the top down, the law inadvertently shatters the only working discipline mechanism these villages possess.
The reservation system constantly breaks the 50% threshold.
And we know exactly what happens when the 50% threshold is broken.
The threat of social death evaporates. The voters lose their absolute majority, they lose their leverage, and they are terrified of the elite going rogue again.
So they plunge right back into the mediocrity trap. They go back to electing the incompetent average Joe.
And the macroeconomic cost of that plunge is staggering. Munshi and Rosenzweig calculated the exact damage caused by this well-intentioned policy.
Yeah, but constantly breaking the 50% threshold, the reservation system results in a massive 13.4% permanent loss in overall governance dividends.
13.4% of the town's potential wealth and infrastructure is just vaporized because the government tried to help without understanding the invisible structures underneath.
In trying to heal the patient with forced fairness, the medicine accidentally paralyzed their only working immune system.
It is a textbook example of why top-down policy fails when it ignores the informal networks operating on the ground.
The formal system tried to impose a modern, inclusive structure on a society that was relying on an exclusionary, informal survival mechanism.
Which gives us the perfect lens to pull back and synthesize this entire journey. What we're really looking at here is a story about the painkillers a society takes when the formal immune system of democracy collapses.
That is the perfect analogy. When people cannot trust the formal institutions, when the courts are corrupt, when the political parties are non-existent, when the ballot box offers no real accountability, they will inevitably build their own armor.
Informal networks, bloodlines, the threat of social isolation, these are the painkillers. They keep the body alive.
They allow for incredible, localized feats like the 17% infrastructure boom and the empowerment of marginalized genders within the network.
But they are brutally exclusive. They leave the minority nodes out in the cold. And ultimately, a painkiller cannot sustain a modern, inclusive, growing society forever.
And that leads to a looming crisis, doesn't it? Because these informal networks are not static. The world is changing rapidly around them.
It is. The researchers point directly to the horizon in their conclusion. The twin forces of urbanization and globalization are currently acting like a wrecking ball against these ancient village networks.
Young people in rural India are moving away to the cities. They are getting jobs in tech firms or manufacturing far outside of the traditional agricultural economy.
And they are increasingly marrying outside of their specific subcastes.
Which means the ultimate weapon, The threat of social death is losing its teeth.
Yeah, if a 25-year-old can just move to Mumbai and get a corporate job, he doesn't care if the village elders expel him from the local marriage circle. The threat of losing the mutual insurance pool doesn't matter if he has corporate health insurance.
The informal stick is breaking, and the terror of this transition phase is what happens next.
If the informal stick of caste discipline breaks, but the modern, formal systems, clean political parties, uncorrupt courts, transparent bureaucratic accountability have not yet been built to replace it, where does the society land?
They fall into the gap.
They fall into the abyss. If the caste discipline dies and there are no strong formal political parties to take its place, these villages are going to plummet right back into the mediocrity trap, and they won't have a mechanism to escape it.
They will lose their elites to the cities, they will lose their ability to secure budgets, and the infrastructure will crumble. It is an absolute race against time to build formal democratic institutions before the informal ones completely evaporate.
It is a profound transition phase, and it forces us to reevaluate everything we think we know about how power and accountability actually function. Which brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this time dissecting the invisible puppet strings in rural India, exploring how a lack of formal accountability forces people to rely on extreme informal networks. But I want you to turn this exact same lens on your own life.
Look at your own backyard.
Exactly. Think about the micro battlefields in your world. Think about your local city council or the corporate boardroom at your company or even the board of your homeowners association.
We all exist in systems where the official rules are sometimes weak, and formal accountability is an illusion.
Look at the leaders sitting in those rooms. Are they the absolute best and brightest? Or are they mediocre? And if they are mediocre, why were they chosen?
It's a scary question.
When the formal systems fail, who is really sitting in the big chairs? And more importantly, what invisible, informal network of favors, threats, and social survival is actually pulling their strings in the dark? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Look closely at your world because the strings are always there if you know how to see them.